You're listening to the Confidence Within podcast. If you are a successful professional entrepreneur who is nonetheless struggling with the fear of public speaking, then you are in the right place. This podcast is all about igniting your inner confidence, learning to show up with genuine authority and brilliance, and becoming the best version of yourself. I'm your host, Victoria Lesnyansky, and welcome to my show. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Confidence Within podcast. Have you ever felt overwhelmed, mentally scattered, like no matter how hard you try, you just can't switch off the stress? Maybe you're performing at a high level on the outside, but internally, it feels like your mind is constantly racing. Your focus is slipping and your energy is drained. If that sounds familiar, today's episode is going to give you practical tools you can actually use. Not just theories, not just ideas, but real strategies to help you regain control of your thoughts, your emotions, and your performance. Because here is the truth. Confidence doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from learning how to manage your internal state. And this is exactly what we're diving into today with my guest, Dr. Gregory Obert. Dr. Obert is a clinical psychologist and the founder of the Royal Oasis Psychotherapy Institute, where he helps motivated individuals rebuild their lives through evidence-based psychotherapy and practical mental performance tools. He has spent more than 15 years working with thousands of clients and currently serves as the staff psychologist supporting trauma and mental health treatments in high-pressure environments. Greg's work focuses on teaching people how to regain control of their attention, emotions, and decision-making through concrete mindfulness techniques that work in real life, not just in theory. He is also the host of the long-running podcast Meditations by Gregory T. Obert, where he translates psychological insight into practical mental training for everyday life. Let's dive in. Hello, Greg. Thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast.
Victoria, hello. It's so nice to be on. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
What we're going to talk about is something that I think all of us experience right now. We live in unpredictable times, a little bit of unstable economy, and recently there have been a lot of layoffs going on in the corporate world. For a lot of us, this is fairly new. I mean, I'm old enough to remember some really difficult times in certain parts of the country in early 2000s, and this feels very similar in terms of layoffs and everything else that's going on. And so what I really want to do today is help my listeners deal with these times. How do you stay productive? How do you stay effective? How do you stay the best you can be in your corporate career or maybe in your business in spite of what's happening around you? And of course, the reason I'm talking to you is because, as we all know, stress is not an external factor. Stress is internal. It's a way we process that makes us stressed, the way we process reality that makes us stressed, not the reality itself, not what we're surrounded by. And so I'd love to hear your opinion on things. I would love to get your advice and help my listeners deal with the situation more effectively and be equipped with more tools.
I'm happy to share what I know. I chuckled a little earlier because you said, we live in, and then you paused, unpredictable times. And that is a very kind way of putting the interesting times that we seem to be living in these days.
Yeah.
The word that you said that I wanted to hone in on is stress, because I hear this word a lot. And I think you had a lot of insight when you talked about how we view stress in terms of how that impacts our emotions, how that impacts our productivity. But the working definition that I like to use for stress is when demands outweigh resources. And so when I think about someone who's stressed, they have so many demands placed on them and just not enough gas in the tank to actually accomplish those resources. Now, that gap may be a large gap where they have significantly reduced resources. Sometimes it's just a little bit. But the point is that if we find ourselves either in actuality or perceiving that we don't have the resources, then that's going to lead to a lot of stress. And of course, that's going to carry over into the workplace, which is exactly what you were saying. How do we stay productive in times where, well, things are very unpredictable? Even before we started recording, you were talking about the Oracle layoffs and just massive amount of layoffs there. I'm a big gamer in my spare time, and it seems to be that there's massive layoffs in the gaming industry all the time. And it's really sad to see that people who just want a stable 9 to 5, they can't really get it. So what do they do? And this is something that I work with work on with clients that I see at my practice. And it's very simple, yet it's not always easy to implement. And I know this is going to sound very woo-woo because it's all out there. It's such a buzzword these days. And I'm telling you that even though it sounds woo-woo, it's actually very useful. And that is mindfulness. That is the foundation of how you get through these stressful times. And I'm about to save your listeners thousands of dollars on mindfulness seminars because I feel like everyone out there is trying to sell some kind of mindfulness, this or that. And this is what it is, very simply. It's paying attention on purpose to the present moment, non-judgmentally.
Okay, Greg, I'm gonna have you repeat those one more time so that if anybody's taking notes, they're like, oh wait, let me write this down.
Fair enough. All right, taking notes out there, paying attention on purpose to the present moment, non-judgmentally. And by non-judgmentally, I mean focusing on the facts of the situation as they are, not as you want them to be. So I think a lot of times we find ourselves in these difficult situations, and it's very easy to put our own little spin on it. Well, it's really not that bad. I can handle it. Oh, my boss gave me this extra project, even though my plate is already really full. It's fine. I can handle it. No big deal. Well, it might be a big deal because having all of that extra responsibility may negatively impact you if you don't have the resources necessary, again, whether actual or perceived, to take care of that project. So, of course, your performance on the job is going to suffer. You're not going to know any of this if you're not practicing mindfulness. Because the more that we can pay attention to the present moment as it is, rather than as we want it to be, the more likely we are to make a better informed decision about what the next steps are. So mindfulness isn't necessarily the prescription as far as what the next step is, but you can't take the next step if you don't do mindfulness first. And just sort of as a bow on that, for those of you out there that are familiar with the 12-step program, as an example, step 1 of 12 is recognizing there's a problem. Now, there's 11 more steps after that, but you can't do any of those steps unless you do the first step, which is recognizing the problem. And the same is true in the corporate world. You can't actually function better, improve your own well-being, which is then, of course, going to improve the well-being of the organization if you're not aware that there's a problem in the first place.
I want to take just a quick moment to share something special with you that I know will resonate. If your struggle with public speaking anxiety prevents you from showing up as the leader and expert that you know you are, I totally get it. I've been there. That's why I created a free guide for you, 5 proven steps to boost your public speaking confidence right now. This guide is packed with practical tips you can implement immediately to help you calm your nerves, command the room, and speak with genuine confidence. You can grab it right now at guide.confidencewithinpodcast.com. All right, let's dive back into the conversation. So how do you know if you are living in this survival mode? How can you tell, number one, if you are experiencing this, but number two, if you are a manager and you have a team, how do you know if people who are reporting to you are actually really, really stressed? Because a lot of times, let's be honest, a lot of times you're not going to go to your boss and say, by the way, I'm really stressed. This new thing you just gave me, I cannot do it. Because you know that if you're going to continue saying, I'm not going to do it, I'm stressed, then you're going to be the next one to go. So how do you, now, first of all, how do you determine it for yourself if I'm stressed and I need to really take care of this? And how you figure this out as a boss?
Yes. And that's a great point, right? Some places, unfortunately, some workplaces, some managers are going to be, shall we say, unsupportive. I'll be kind. It will be unsupportive. And yeah, if you go to them and say, you know, hey, this isn't working for me, they might say, well, tough luck. Yeah. Assuming you don't have a workplace like that, because that's a sort of a whole other thing. And I'd be happy to talk about it if you think it'd be useful. Step one has to be with the self, right? So when we think about someone who is in that survival state, as you say, the phrase that I will use is the fight or flight state, which probably most people have heard of. And essentially what this means is that when your anxiety state, and anxiety is just sort of the clinical term for fear. So think about high level fear is, well, high. Then you are going to be in this state of, do I approach the threat and fight it? Do I run away? Or sometimes you'll hear the third, which is freeze. Do I just kind of freeze up and do nothing? When people tend to be in this state, and by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical threat. Usually when I say that, people are thinking of like the deer in the road, right? Does the deer run away, jump at the car, or just freeze? But when we think about the corporate world, it might be that there is an emotional threat, a mental threat. If I don't do this, there's going to be a layoff, and I know there's going to be layoffs eventually, and I'm going to be the first one to go. If I don't do this, I might get reassigned to do something I don't want to do. I might get demoted, or I might miss out on that promotion, and Johnny's going to get it instead of me. So the first step is to recognize if you are actually in the fight or flight state more often than not. So when you're in fight or flight, there's some key physiological changes that are happening in your body. First off is going to be your breathing. When we are in fight or flight, we're going to breathe very shallowly, and we're going to breathe heavy into our chests. This is a useful thing when we actually need to use our fight or flight system. So if you're lifting weights, for example, exercising, doing any kind of running, you're going to take those short, shallow breaths, and that's great. It's going to amp your body up. If you find yourself breathing very shallowly throughout the day, well, you might be unintentionally triggering your fight or flight state. There's a fun little experiment that I do with almost all of my clients when I talk about ways to calm themselves down, and that's one easy way is to do some deep breathing. Right. And I'll ask them, show me how you've done deep breathing in the past if they're familiar with it. And I'll say 95 to 97% of the time, they are breathing deeply into their chests. And this isn't going to work. This isn't going to help you calm down on the job or elsewhere, because when you're breathing into your chests, you're just activating fight or flight. So even if you're trying to calm down, your body's trying to amp up and you're just fighting yourself. So long-winded way of saying, one key sign is that you're going to be breathing shallowly into your chest very often. Second sign that I like to point out, especially for the high achievers, take note of any muscle tension or discomfort in the body. So I don't think it's too woo-woo to say that our body keeps track of our emotions. Think about any time that you've been nervous. You probably have felt butterflies in your stomach. If
Which a
you
lot of my audience experiences all the time in public speaking.
Yes, that's a perfect example, right? Because you're up there, everyone's looking at you. If you're feeling nervous about that, you're going to feel the physiological effects of
Yes.
that emotion. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. That just means you're human. If you didn't feel any kind of physiological reactions to your emotions, I'd be very concerned about you for a different reason. So it's useful to have those cues. That's not the only cue that we can have, though. If you find that your heart is racing quite a bit, that's going to increase your, of course, blood pressure. It's going to increase your temperature. So you might be more prone to being irritable because the hotter we are, we were just talking about temperature before we got on. The hotter we tend to be, whether it's outside weather or, the air conditioner broke, we're going to be a little bit more irritable. Think too about muscle tension. A lot of people don't realize this, but when they are very anxious, they can store tension anywhere and everywhere in their bodies. So I know for me, it's the shoulders. If I'm walking around like a scarecrow, with my shoulders up to my ears, I know that there's something off and I need to check in with myself and see what's going on there. So if you're in fight or flight, that's one. Checking in with your body for any physiological sensations. And then the third thing that I encourage my clients to check in with is how they tend to be thinking about their job, about their coworkers, about their lives throughout the day. So in a flavor of psychology called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is probably the most common one that people hear a lot about, it's very, very well promoted. They have a good PR team, whoever they are, but there's this idea that our thoughts are going to impact how we feel, our emotions, and our behaviors.
Yes.
So if I'm going through the day thinking that my boss is a jerk, none of this is fair to me, I'm doom scrolling on social media and I see all these layoffs happening, that is going to impact how I start to think about myself, how I start to think about my job, how I start to think about my performance on the job. If I'm continually thinking to myself, everything is bad, everything is awful, I hate it here, why do I even have this job? I'm surrounded by clowns. Then there might be something going on under the surface where that anxiety, that fear is elevated to the point where it's going to start impacting your professional life, your personal life, and of course, going along with your professional life, it's going to be your work performance. You asked me too what this looks like with managers and how they may be able to spot this. It's going to depend, of course, on the employee because everybody's different, right? Some people, they will externalize their stress, their anxiety. So that might look like, I'm just going to continually come into work late. I'm going to continually leave early. I'm going to take a lot of time off. I'm going to miss deadlines. I remember working with someone who, I don't know how he did it, but his entire desk was just piles of paper. I don't know how he found anything. It was, in his mind, organized chaos, but in my mind, it was a tornado that had come through there every single day. So that might be some of the externalizing happening. For other people, they might internalize it a little bit more. So they might sort of kind of lose the spark in their eyes when they come in. They might be quieter. They might be a little bit more irritable. You might see them kind of shrugging or, kind of just looking down. Those, of course, aren't surefire signs that someone is stuck in fight or flight. However, they are indications. And as a manager, if you are in charge of a team and you care about your team, that may be a great opportunity to check in with them and see how they're doing.
Yeah. And, 10 years ago when I was managing developers in my last corporate job, I remember that thinking about a couple of people on my team that something is going on. Because just like you described, one of them became really quiet. It was like, not speaking up in meetings anymore, just quiet, no opinions. Almost you feel like the person doesn't care, which
Hmm.
may not be the case. It's
Yes.
just the response to stress. Whereas the other person that I started getting worried about became really angry and really irritable and was always talking back to any suggestions. So again, that may be some sort of a response that you see, and it's not necessarily that the person is just mean, but the person is trying to deal with a lot of stress.
Yeah.
So so as a so let's start with employees. Let's say you are the one who experiences this situation, who experiences stress, who realizes, based on what you just mentioned, all of those signs, who is listening to this right now going like, wait, this is me.
Hmm.
What would be the first step after you identify that, yes, I'm under stress? What would be the first step to try and get out of that spiral?
Yeah.
What would you recommend?
Well, there's a variety of things that people can do, and I like to give people practical tips. So I'm hoping that these skills are things that anyone listening would be able to implement very quickly to start to change some of these things in their lives. Now, of course, if these skills aren't enough, that's when I recommend, hey, come see someone like me, come to therapy, and we can work on these in a very personalized, customized way so that you get the results that you're looking for.
Yeah.
But for those that are looking for some quick skills to try, these skills are going to depend on what level of intensity your emotions are at. So, very quickly, when our emotions are, this is just my rule of thumb, when your emotions are in the 0 to 7 range, the logical part of your brain is still online. So don't get me wrong, a 6 or a 7 is not a comfortable emotion to be at. It's still something you can manage okay. Once you hit that 8 to 10 range, that logic part of your brain is just going to get very quiet. It never shuts off entirely, but it gets so quiet that it lets the emotional part of your brain take over. So if you are somebody who's functioning in that 8 to 10 range, the number one skill that I can recommend right now is the skill called tipping the temperature. So for those of us who are familiar with a dive response, you might be knowing where I'm going with this. But for those that aren't, if you were to jump into a cold pool of water right now, what would happen to your body? Probably that air is going to go away. You're going to, kind of gasp. Your blood flow is going to change dramatically because your body's going to want to prioritize the brain and the heart.
Yeah.
You are going to cool off the temperature of your body very quickly. And I guarantee you that you are not thinking about whatever it was that your boss did or said in that moment. And if you say that, I might call you a liar. But because most of us, we're going to be so shocked by the temperature of the water. If you cool the body down, you are going to cool the emotions down. If you're in the 8 to 10 range, this isn't going to bring you down to a 0, but it is going to bring you down to a 7 or lower. That's enough for the logic part of your brain to come back online and actually make a better informed decision, which we'll get to those skills in a moment. Now, you may be thinking, Greg, unless I'm a lifeguard, I don't have a pool of cold water to jump into. This seems silly. How is this practical for me? Well, you can do one of two things. I suspect you probably work in a place where there is a sink. And so if there is a sink, take some time, go to the bathroom, splash cold water on your face. Doesn't have to be ice cold water, but cool to cold water. You could also take a paper towel or a towel in general, make a cold compress. You put it on your forehead, you put it on the back of your neck, and rest it there for about 30 seconds. It's going to be long enough that you will notice a difference in your emotions because that sensation is going to root you to the present moment. Just like jumping into that pool of cold water is going to make you forget about whatever you were thinking about. This cold compress or those splashes of cold water is going to root you to the feelings of the temperature of that water in that moment. So that's one thing that you can do when you're in that 8 to 10 range. For the 7, this also works with 8 to 10, but for the 7 or lower, the cheapest thing you can do, it's cheap as free, is working on that deep breathing that I mentioned previously. So we want to make sure that we're breathing into our belly. It's called diaphragmatic breathing. If there's any singers out there, they know exactly what I'm talking about. You want to pull that air down into your stomach, and you can test this, see if you're doing it correctly by resting your hand on your belly. When you breathe in, your hand should raise up like your belly is filling up like a balloon. And when you exhale, it should sink back down towards your body. There's a lot of different techniques out there. I've heard of box breathing. So this is in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4.
This is the one I love.
Yes, it's a great technique. I've heard some people prefer in for 5, out for 7. Honestly, I couldn't care less which technique you like because the secret is less about the numbers and more about pulling that air into your belly. If you were to do this for 2 to 3 minutes, you would notice a world of difference in how you're thinking. Now, like I said, it may take a little bit of extra effort. Like I said, I didn't say this. It may take a little bit of extra effort if you're in the 8 to 10 range. Certainly when you're in the 7 to lower range, you may not need to do as much deep breathing. Once you do it, though, you're going to calm the nervous system down. Because when we breathe into our belly, we don't activate our fight or flight. We activate our rest and digest system. So that's going to calm everything down. Mm-hmm. If acting on our emotions when we're in the 0 to 7 range is not helpful, one thing that you can do is also called opposite action. And this is a skill from another flavor of psychology called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. And essentially it goes like this. Say your goal is to learn how to ride a horse. I don't know if you're a horse rider or not, Victoria, but I'm not. You are, okay. I suspect then that you've probably gotten thrown from a horse at some point.
No, and touch wood right now.
Okay, I'm knocking on my head right now. Usually for some people, for most people, they'll get knocked off at some point. So they're probably going to feel afraid in that moment, and understandably so. You just got knocked off a horse. If they go with what their emotion tells them to do, it's going to be to run away. And that's not going to be effective in that moment. So what they need to do instead, if their goal is to learn how to ride a horse, is do the opposite of that emotion. They need to approach it. And when they do that, even though it might be nerve-wracking, they're able to get back on the horse, they're able to learn how to ride, and life is good. Think about this in the corporate world too. Our emotions tell us to do things all the time. If I'm feeling sad, I want to withdraw. If I'm feeling fear, again, I want to run away. If I'm feeling angry, I want to approach. I want to attack. Sometimes acting on those emotions is not going to be useful. So taking a moment to check in with yourself, is this an emotion that if I act on it, it's going to be helpful for me and it's going to get me the results that I want? And you're able to do this because you're in the 0 to 7 range. If the answer is no, then do the opposite of what the emotion is telling you to do. Does that make sense, I hope?
It does. It does make sense. What I find interesting is that there is such a big difference between being truly emotionally resilient and emotionally numb. And what I see happens a lot is that people cannot tell them apart for themselves. And so I know from personal experience, when you experience deep stress, when something happens where you are in a panic mode, but it has to do with kids a lot of times, right? You try to kind of numb your emotions so that you stay strong. But there is a very fine line between being strong emotionally and being numb emotionally. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. And I think this is where, again, that mindfulness comes into play, where we need to check in with ourselves. Because I suspect there may be some people in your audience that go, okay, well, I'm here to learn about business and how to be more successful. And this nerd is talking about, emotions and, who cares about that kind of thing? Well, I hope that everybody does. I hope that I can convince people, if they're skeptics, to start caring about these things, because just because we ignore the emotion doesn't mean it goes away.
Right.
The emotion is going to stick around. It's sort of like the dirt that you sweep under the rug. Right? We can pretend that it's not there, but it's still going to be there. And so if I am a high achiever, and I suspect many in your audience are high achievers, and the research tends to bear this out, you are naturally going to be you're going to burn a bit hotter than the average person. So in other words, you're probably going to be just a little bit more prone to anxiety. Not always, but in general, that tends to be the case. And sometimes that's useful. Having a little bit of anxiety can help us achieve great things. Problem is, a lot of times people take that anxiety and they sort of put themselves into the product or the business that they're creating. And the performance of that product or that business is going to be a direct reflection of who they are as a person. That's not necessarily true. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, we live in interesting times. Things can be volatile at times. Maybe things happen to a business or a product that just we have no control over. Yet if I'm someone who's that heavily invested in what I'm doing, I might just collapse as a person.
Right.
And so if I am someone who's in a leadership role and I'm in charge of a lot of people, one thing that I encourage them to do is to check in with themselves about what it means to be strong, right? So it's one thing to be able to handle a lot of different demands. That's sort of what we sign up for when we become leaders at any point. We're going to have to answer for a lot of different things. That's okay. When you take off that leader hat, and maybe you have to wear it for a bit longer than your employees, when you take it off and you're able to go home, are you enjoying life? Are you able to relax, put your feet up, turn the phone off, go watch a nice comedy, do whatever it is that you do to calm down? If when you take that, so if you're able to do that, I would say you're probably being resilient. Mm-hmm. If when you take that leadership hat off, well, if you're able to, life feels awful. It just, you find yourself needing to maybe stare at a wall just to decompress from all the stimulation that you've had that day. If you feel like you're detached from your employees, from people in your personal life, if you feel like you're just sort of kind of going through the day, you're just doing enough to get by, yeah, you might get those external words of praise. Wow, look at how strong, look at how resilient you are. It may look like that on the outside, but inside there's not a lot of happiness or a lot of joy. It's at that point where you're looking at that numb side of things, and you may need to seek out some professional help at that point. There's no shame in that. We all need it at some point.
Yeah, no, I love that you're talking about this, because for a lot of people, that especially people who are used to think of themselves as strong, as capable, productive, successful, highly functioning, there is this symbiotic relationship between them and their job. Their position, their job becomes their identity. And when their position or job is under stress, their identity becomes under stress.
Mm-hmm.
When there are issues at work, they absorb everything and take it home with them. And some people become emotionally unstable, some people become emotionally numb, but it often happens when you cannot separate you and who you are as a person, as a human, from who you are as a leader, or in relation to where you work, or in relation to your business. That's very common with business owners. Wouldn't you agree?
I would absolutely agree. I would say even if you don't own the business, even if you're in charge of the business, the higher up the ladder you go, especially when you find yourself in the C-suite, you are more susceptible to that piece. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that people shouldn't take pride in their jobs, because of course, people work hard, they get the titles that they have, they accomplish the things that they do. That's great. But exactly what you said, Victoria, if we are fused to our jobs and our entire mood, our entire worldview is dependent on whatever is happening at work, we are definitely setting ourselves up for a world of hurt.
Yeah. And another thing that I've noticed, and I think you probably noticed as well, is a lot of people in these uncertain times, or whenever there is a threat of layoffs, or just in general, just, all the stress around them, they go and dive into their work and become super productive. And sometimes that productivity backfires, because it's no longer productivity for the sake of doing the best you can for the company, but it's losing yourself in your work. It's a productivity as a form of emotional escape.
Yes.
How would someone tell the difference if they're productive because they want to be productive, if they're productive because they're escaping, and how can they step back? And should they step back?
Yes, this is such a great question. And I'm gonna make an extreme point, or tell an extreme story to prove a point. And I promise I'll bring it back. So I have worked with a lot of veterans in my career, and this exact point came up a lot with the Vietnam veterans that I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about how they were off in Vietnam, doing all that stuff. Next day they were on a plane to Guam or Hawaii. Next day they're in California. Hey, thanks for your service. See you later. Um, how do you adjust in the span of 2 days from, combat in the jungle to being back in the United States? It's very difficult. And so a lot of them would just bury themselves in their work so that they could avoid thinking about everything that happened when they were in the war. And this sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. It certainly stopped working when everybody turned 65, because then all of a sudden they retired and they had all the time in the world to think about what happened. So that's when a lot of these veterans started seeking help. And I'm glad that they did.
Yes.
I think about that a lot when this topic of productivity comes up, because even though we might not have been in a war, we might be facing some very intense stressors. We might be facing that numbness that you mentioned. We might be facing burnout. And rather than listen to, again, the nerd on your show talking about emotions, this doesn't apply to me, it's better to just bury myself in my work and just go, 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 so that I don't have to stop and think about what's happening with me. Now, this is a great short-term strategy if your goal is avoidance, because you'll probably be able to, hop yourself up on enough caffeine to
Yeah.
to churn out whatever product or whatever goal, that you want to accomplish. But eventually it's going to be too much to handle. And that might come out in, if you're in a leadership role, making poor decisions for the company, for your team. If you're an employee, that might come out in sort of what you were mentioning, Victoria, anger, shouting. It might come out as, again, taking a lot of time off. The short-term strategy, the short-term gain is not going to help people in the long run. And so you asked if people should step back. Well, yes, if when you check in with yourself, you're saying, I'm not doing this. I'm not giving my all to the company and pushing myself to achieve because I take pride in my work and I want to do the best job that I can, and then I can set it down at the end of the day. I'm doing this push because I just don't want to think about things going on in my life, or maybe I'm afraid that if I don't do this, I'm going to get fired, so my identity gets wrapped up in the job.
And it's hard. Like, I'm trying to think, what advice can we give people who are in this situation where maybe there is a layoff coming in their company, and you have this, not only you have stress that you don't know what the future holds, but also you're distracted. And so sometimes you go 100%, 110% in your work and become super productive for the sake of not thinking about it, which again helps a little bit so you don't have to think about it. But what would be like, what kind of advice can we give people who find themselves right now in this situation? I go to work every day. I don't know if it's going to be another month or if it's going to be another 10 years at this job, or if I'll get an email at 6 a.m. tomorrow that my services are no longer needed. How do you approach, and we talk about feelings, emotions. So how do you approach your workday so that you're not going to be not stressed, but so that you are minimally stressed and you can
Yeah.
enjoy what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. You guys can really great questions. I wish I could. I wish I could sit here and tell people, oh, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. But
Mm.
that's very invalidating. And of course, I wish I could say, layoffs won't come for this company. If I had that kind of predictive ability, I'd be playing the Powerball a lot more frequently. What I will say is that while these situations are very difficult, and I don't want to invalidate that, what I do want to say is there are better, notice I didn't say easy, there are better, easier ways to get through a tough situation like that, and there are worse, harder ways to get through a situation like that. So the one thing that popped into my mind as we were talking is remembering that you are more than just the job. And is your well-being, your sense of self, worth potentially losing just to put that effort in for the 110% for the short-term gain that may or may not prevent the layoff for you? For some people, it might be, in which case, do you have a plan set up for after the fact so that you can decompress a little bit, whether it's a little bit of time off? If you can't take time off, are there activities you can do after work so you can get a little bit of fun back in your life? If doing that 110% for you is not worth the effort, or it's not worth it for you, then I would just say remember this idea as you go through your day. still do the best job that you can. I'm not saying anyone should be a slacker. What I am saying though is that if you feel that anxiety start to ramp up and you feel yourself maybe getting lost in the project or needing to give and having to push, remember that you don't need to do that if it's going to negatively impact your well-being. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. It does make sense. What would be one piece of advice you can give to people who are experiencing stress at work, who are experiencing stress in their business, not stress based on what they do again, but more about uncertainty and economy and everything else that's going on, and doing the best they can, and being the best at their jobs and the competition and everything that's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would be maybe one golden nugget that you would give in general to a lot of your clients as advice to follow in this situation?
Absolutely. I'm going to cheat and I'm going to give you two if that's okay.
I would love that.
Because I
Thank
feel
you.
like they're very connected. So the first is that even though it can be very difficult to go through stress, remember that stress doesn't have to run your life. For those that are familiar with people like Louise Hay, she talked a lot about this. You don't have to let the stress run your life. There are things that we can do in order to get our lives back. We're always in charge. Whatever you can do to really kick that stress down, I encourage you to do it, whether it's something we talked about already or whether it's something that you already know how to do. Make sure you keep that practice going. The second thing, and I hear this all the time because you're saying, well, there's all this uncertainty and things could be bad and everything might be awful. Well, if we assume one way, we have to assume the other.
Yes.
And so it is very true that the next day might bring death, destruction, ruin, everything terrible for the company. It is also true that in the span of a day, things can change for the better. Things can go on the upswing and a wonderful new golden era might emerge for that employee or for the company. So if you find yourself sort of being pulled into that negative, just remember that things can be very different in a positive way. And my favorite example of this is always hearing the stories about Walt Disney himself, I mean, basically going bankrupt to put out Snow White, and look what happened to him. In those moments, if he just continued to assume the worst and the negative, well, we would have been deprived of, one of the greatest entertainers of the 20th century. The goal is less about to just be more positive, because I think sometimes people think that, well, this guy's just saying just think more positively. I'm not saying that. I'm saying think more accurately. And so if you are in an uncertain time and you find yourself only assuming negative things are going to happen, well, the definition of uncertainty is we don't know what's going to happen. So if I assume negative things could happen, I'm equally as justified in assuming positive things could happen. That's what it means to think more accurately, not just ignore, obstacles or challenges. But if we're in uncertainty, let's practice our mindfulness and let's sit in uncertainty rather than just automatically assuming the worst.
I love that. Actually, love this clarification. It's basically, yes, we don't want to be let's just be all positive and everything is rosy and great. But I love how you define uncertainty. Uncertainty means that both sides are equally possible.
Yes. It's the Schrodinger's cat of business, right?
Right. Both situations are equally possible, and staying calm in uncertain times, knowing that you are equally likely to experience incredible things.
Yeah. Because I'm
And
sure all of us here have had that situation where everything seems tough and, oh, God, I don't know what's going to happen. And then one email comes in, and all of a
Right.
sudden, everything's different and everything has changed.
Yes.
So stay with the
100%.
uncertainty as uncertain rather than uncertainty automatically being
Bad.
doom and gloom.
Right, right. I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Greg. This has been wonderful, very, very helpful. If my listeners want to learn more about you, how can they get a hold of you? Where can they find you?
Of course. Well, again, this was such a pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me. Everybody can go to my practice website, which is the Royal Oasis Psychotherapy Institute. So it's royaloasispi.com. There you can learn all about my therapy practices. If you're interested in doing some work on a personal, customized level, I'm licensed to do virtual psychotherapy in 43 states and some territories, including DC. You can also take a listen to my podcast, which is called Meditations by Gregory Obert. I've been doing it for almost 10 years now, which I can't believe I'm saying that. But there's a ton of guided meditations on there to help you kind of calm down, get through your day, as well as some fantastic interviews from people who have all sorts of insights. And in fact, Victoria is going to be on very soon, so I'm excited for her interview as well.
I'm very excited about that.
Yes, but that is the main place for people to go. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all the usual places.
Wonderful. And you can find all the links in the show notes right here
Great.
On this podcast. Greg, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure, and hopefully I'll have you here again. Thank you.
I'd love to be back. Thank you so much.
There you have it. What I loved most about this episode is how practical it is. This isn't just about understanding stress or burnout, it's about actually having the tools to do something about it. So my invitation to you is this. Don't just listen to this episode. Apply something from it. Even one small shift in how you manage your internal state can create a huge difference in your confidence and performance. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could really benefit from it. As always, keep showing up, keep growing, and keep building that confidence from within. See you in the next episode. Bye for now.